Thanks for joining us for Season 5 of the Service to School Stories podcast. I'm Sydney Mathis, your host and Chief Program Officer at Service to School. This season, we wanted to highlight some of our incredible alumni and dive deeper into their stories. You'll hear from a variety of student veterans about their journey from the military through the admissions process and onto campus. Guests will share how they overcame challenges, and we'll look back on their journey to give some advice along the way. Let's kick it off.
All right, we are back with the Service to School Stories podcast. Today, I have the absolute joy and honor to chat with Justin Cole. Justin is a former Service to School applicant who is now studying at MIT. He served some time in the Air Force. There's some overlap there between the Air Force and the Space Force. I'll let him dig into that a little bit. But Justin, we are really excited to just chat with you today, learn more about your story, your journey from, your time in service to now doing awesome research at MIT. So thank you so much for being here. Can you share a little bit more about your background with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Sydney, thank you so much. So before I joined the military, I was in Westboro, Massachusetts, a small little town in central Mass, and graduated high school with, like a 1.8 GPA. So, college did not immediately seem like it was in the cards. And I had a family member who had joined the Air Force and kind of nudged me towards it, saying, "Hey, this will be a great experience to, find some sense of purpose and, a sense of like ethic and stuff like that." So I joined the Air Force at 18 and entered the Air Force as a 1 Charlie 6, which is a satellite system operator. So this is all, around 2012 timeframe. And went into basic training looking for that sense of purpose. Found it in a lot of ways, and the shared suffering and enjoyment of all the fun stuff that happens there. And yeah, so after I finished basic training, I went off to my tech school, which was in Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, and started doing all of my undergraduate space studies. It's the program that they call it out there. And I became a GPS satellite system operator. So I specifically worked to kind of kick the tires on GPS satellites, do on-orbit operations. And, these are things like looking for things that are going wrong and fixing them if we can. And then if not, figuring out the next steps from there. Also just a lot of general maintenance, that kind of thing. But it's all, sitting down at a console doing computer work and just looking at numbers on screens. So from there, went off to a teaching gig. I eventually started teaching people in simulators how to work in that environment and doing a lot of classroom instruction, so formal lecture kind of stuff. And after that, I went off to the 16th Space Control Squadron, which was this fantastic unit that deploys systems out to do something called defensive space control, and that's an old doctrinal term, but what we did was we looked for sources of interference and tried to geolocate sources of electromagnetic interference on different parts of the Earth. So did that for a while, managed to deploy to Japan. I'd love to talk about some of that stuff later too. And then after that, I finished out my time in Colorado Springs working with a unit called the Advanced Space Operations Center. So, the 319 CTS. So, and that was just another teaching gig, and got to do a lot more, integrating with, other GPS folks and other SATCOM folks. So, so I never truly became a member of the Space Force, but, when that branch of the military got activated in 2019, even though I didn't put on the blue name tapes because it would have come with an active duty service commitment, I did end up working for the Space Force in the job that I was doing. So,
Yeah. The only thing that comes to mind, and this is as someone who works with our applicants to understand the value that admission sees in the military student population. I mean, you mentioned you joined at 18, right? And the list of responsibilities you just mentioned that you had as a young adult, that is just kind of crazy to think that, I mean, it sounds like you're doing really intricate stuff that a lot of 19, 20-year-olds don't have the opportunity to do. So what was that like, kind of like jumping into these responsibilities and these kind of expectations, as a young adult?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Whenever I talk about like this period of, being 18, 19 and, jumping up on a satellite, it is kind of bewildering seeing, and I'm sure a lot of other veterans can commiserate with this, like the things that you're authorized to do as an 18, 19-year-old. It was definitely surreal. I mean, a lot of the reality, I think, of it was kind of abstracted away by the fact that you're looking at a number on a screen that represents some kind of, attitude tolerance of a satellite, making sure that it's pointing in the right direction. But, I was lucky enough to have leadership who would consistently come back and emphasize, like, hey, just recognize, you're supporting, 4 billion plus users a day. They would come back and talk to us about the necessity of GPS in global finance, and or just
Yeah.
parents getting little Jimmy to the baseball game or something. So
Right. I mean, think about like a 19-year-old who graduates from high school and just is out on the market looking for jobs. Like they're probably not going to get that kind of job right out of high school, right? And I just think that is kind of the overlooked aspect of maybe joining the military as opposed to secondary plans is that, wow, what an incredible opportunity for you after high school, right?
yeah,
Um, okay, so did some time you mentioned you wanted to talk about your deployment to Japan. Let's dig into that a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. So the deployment Japan was kind of this big watershed moment in my life that led me to. It was kind of the second event that led me to eventually MIT. So when I was in the service, I also had, I guess, kind of the experience of getting to weather a few natural disasters, if you'll forgive the pun. Um, and when I was in Japan, we ended up out there. We were on Okinawa, and we were there during kind of peak monsoon season. So we went out there and we essentially were there to just build this system on top of a parking lot. Get it shore power. We were setting up antennas and getting ready to do some work out there. And there were these two Category 5 equivalent typhoons, super typhoons that formed in the Pacific, and they just were hurtling towards the Philippines and Guam and Okinawa. Um, and while we were out there, they made landfall, and I remember talking with a friend who had been on the island for way longer than I had. They were saying like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. There were these typhoons used to be like once in a decade storms, and it feels like it's once a year now practically.
Mm.
Um, and I remember like being in my hotel room, kind of an Air Force isn't, I guess, as we were putting us up, uh, uh, with my roommate, and just watching these massive palm trees. Some of them just getting snapped like toothpicks. These things were stories high. And it was pretty surreal to see that amount of like natural force come to bear. So I kind of had this big watershed moment, again, if you'll forgive the pun, of, you know, climate change as this incredibly important reality that is,
Mm.
not just impacting people's lives. I mean, destroying property and injuring and killing some people, for those storms, at least in the Pacific. But also, kind of becoming this really important prerequisite to practically any national security objective you could point to. Um, so, that was kind of this big realization where I thought, all right, there's this other problem that, we've got to push the ball down the field on. And I love the space community, and I find it extremely existentially beautiful to consider the idea of becoming, all the way out to being like a two-planet species and civilization and all the amazing things that space does for us every day on the ground. But a safe, stable climate, in the coming decades is something that, in my mind, trumps that. So, yeah.
Mm. And how much of that experience and those experiences and realizations kind of led to your decision of getting out of the military?
it it led to it inevitably, but not necessarily at first. I explored, if there were any possible opportunities to try and work on this problem as a volunteer. I started joining a lot of nonprofits. Um, and going to a lot of different events, in my free time. Then I started trying to see if I could work on this satellite constellation that's now either close to getting retired, if not retired. It's a DoD weather satellite constellation, and that didn't pan out. So eventually I realized that the only way that I'm going to be able to meaningfully work on climate change is to leave the space community and leave the DoD. So,
Mhm. All right, so let's talk about kind of that transition, right? So you're in Colorado Springs. I know you had taken some classes there at a local college. How did you begin that process of kind of making that transition of out of the military into academia?
yeah, it started off um, honestly pretty far out from my separation date. So when I was near the end of my time, the pandemic happened, and there was a silver lining to being stuck at home and not being able to do a whole lot of work. In that, I realized I could use this as an opportunity to start covering down on all filling all of the gaps in math, for instance, that I had
Hmm.
from high school and stuff like that. So, I remember even at my last job, this was after the pandemic had ended. At my last job in the Air Force, I would spend my lunch break on Khan Academy in my car, just doing like math for sixth graders. Learning how to do multiplication in my head for all that fun stuff. But uh, yeah, TAPS was also an incredibly helpful process to start to understand a lot of what or TAPS, excuse me, a lot of what the options were academically, but honestly, so much of it was also connecting with mentors in the military who had been through academia, especially the space community is a roughly 50-50 officer to enlisted split. So, I had a lot of folks in my office who I could lean on and say, hey, when you studied engineering, what was that like? What were your biggest challenges? Um, so the process started pretty far out.
Yeah, so you started taking classes. You mentioned studying, and starting at sixth grade math. For some of us, it might be a little bit further earlier in the K through 12 curriculum. But when you were taking classes there at UCCS, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, was MIT on your radar at that point?
Not at all. So yeah, I was just taking classes to try and get a degree in essentially computer science, and then see if there was some way that I could project that towards some kind of working for a utility, trying to decarbonize the grid in a in a way that is economically sound. Um, but MIT was totally off the radar. So
Yeah. What did you think was kind of where you would end up?
so I was working to answer that question mostly through, again, interacting with nonprofits. So
Mhm.
when I was at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, for most of my time there, I was taking classes about three-quarter time. And then I was, working part-time as well as,
Mhm.
a grassroots organizer for a nonprofit that was working on, climate issues in the city. I had joined a board of another organization that was, working to promote a just and renewable energy transition in the greater American Southwest. Um, and it was mostly through those things, trying to find these opportunities. So they shed a ton of light. It was super useful, and I would recommend that anybody who is kind of exploring this transition and trying to end up somewhere explore those routes too. But college was also incredibly rewarding. In trying to just like talk with professors about how to be able to, meet these career goals and even like really refine them.
Yeah. What would you say is the best piece of advice that you got from those professors?
Ooh, I think I've got like a one notebook that's just full of these. One of them that comes to mind specifically is to give engineering time. It doesn't feel creative at first, and that's okay. Like you've got to do a
Yeah.
lot of internalizing of the calculus and the physics, and now especially the computer science to be able to make something. But it eventually becomes deeply creative, and I've found that
Yeah.
to be really true.
For sure. And I just love how you highlighted the power of those relationships, right? When we talk with students sometimes and they're hesitant to either go, they're like, I just want to get to the 4 year school where I'm going to finish, right? And a lot of our students transfer. And I say, one of the powerful things there is to get some recent coursework under your belt, absolutely, to show that you can do, rigorous academic work at the level that, some of the more selective schools would anticipate. But also the best takeaway sometimes is the relationships with the faculty members and their professors. Um, Not only just for that letter of recommendation piece, but also for those career connections and the networking. we heard on a podcast at one point, someone said, your network is your net worth. And to be able to like tap back into those professors and that guidance and that advice, like, you can still lean on that notebook that you mentioned, now down the road at a different institution. And it's, more than just a letter of recommendation takeaway. So I love that you highlighted that there. So once you started, how many classes did you take at UCCS before you were looking to transfer?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see. Somewhere in the ballpark of probably 9 to 10.
Yeah, so good solid foundation of credits that you were, able to kind of that give that evidence, right, to an admissions committee that you could do that work. What was your thought process when you were applying to transfer?
There's no way that that this is going to get across the finish line. Like, I had heard about. So I was a spring transfer applicant to MIT when I applied, and I had heard, the previous exchange with admissions that sometimes in the spring transfer they accept just a goose egg, 0 people. And then sometimes it's 1, 2, 3 people. So I thought, what, writing this college application is going to be a really helpful process to understand what writing an actual college application is like. And then I'll apply, to a handful of schools in the fall. But yeah, then it came back, and I've gotten in. So
Worked out that way. Yeah,
yeah.
and that, the timeline of when you can apply is something that, I think a lot of our students struggle to kind of wrap their heads around of not every school does spring admission. More schools will do a fall transfer. The fall transfer certainly use a bigger applicant pool. But also wanting to make sure it kind of lines up with when someone's either transitioning off of active duty or when they're completing an associate's degree, and kind of that next seamless step is to transfer to a campus. So with the spring population being smaller, what was that transition to transferring to a new campus like in the spring? And then we'll come back and talk more broadly about your MIT experience. But first, because the spring class is small and students are kind of already like in their campus experience. So what was that like for you?
It was definitely surreal, because there are so few spring transfers in general. At least MIT, they're ready for you, but there are a few offices that just think like, oh, we have spring transfers, cool.
Right.
So it takes some of that good old fashioned military self advocacy, being the squeaky wheel to get the grease. But MIT's been fantastic though. I mean, moving to Cambridge was amazing. We were definitely taken care of in finding housing, and
Mm,
at least here veterans are kind of helped out. We have the option to be able to live in graduate housing as opposed to the undergrad dorms, so that
mm.
was super nice. And yeah, so I mean, my class that I got accepted with was me and one other dude, and coincidentally, he was also a Navy nuke. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
so we immediately saw eye to eye. We're like the exact same age, and it was great to be able to have that connection out of the gate.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just got spun up into what to expect for the semester. A lot of discussing very closely with administrators, like a lot of the myths about MIT and a lot of the realities,
Mm.
and everybody was just such a beautiful resource. Everybody's door is just wide open and just come in anytime and ask. So
Yeah. What were some of those myths?
yeah. a lot of uh, a lot of the stuff that I wanted to get a clearer idea on was, exactly how difficult, should we anticipate it to be, and um,
Right.
and especially kind of understanding too, like all of this. At least, like walking in, I had this idea of MIT as this beautiful, like really philanthropic organization that gives out all of its courseware through MIT OpenCourseware and like does all this cool research. But I wanted to know what my peers were going to be like because I had this vision of somebody just going to class on a unicycle juggling or something. Uh, and everybody here is, I mean, incredibly humble and brilliant. And if there's a unifying characteristic, I think it's just kind. Um,
Mm.
but I think it was those kinds of things. I wanted to
Yeah.
understand like who's the MIT person.
Right. No one on a unicycle.
Not yet, but I'm hopeful.
There's still time.
Yeah.
There's certainly still time. Um, And what has the transition to that academic environment been like from UCCS to MIT?
It's been fascinating. I will say that any good academic environment is going to be challenging, and UCCS
Mhm.
was challenging too. Like there was, a high degree of academic rigor there, in their calculus and their physics.
Yeah.
Um, I found out that the way that my physics professor taught, classical mechanics, calculus based at UCCS is the same way they teach it here, just with minor tweaks. But I think the best way to illustrate this is to look at the way that like a standard introductory calculus course homework looks. So here at MIT, they kind of assume that if you're here, you've seen at least calculus one before. So their version of calculus one is calculus one plus calculus two, so differential and integral calculus. Um, and instead of it being, hey, here's your homework, it's like 15 problems, and we just want you to, compute this integral or something. It's more, okay, before you start the homework, we want to make sure that you understand how to compute the integral in lecture, and then after that, on the homework, we're going to ask you to, use what you understand about these mathematical relationships to be able to prove something or arrive at something through just a path of logic.
Mhm.
So it scratches a little bit deeper, but it's the same fundamental skills.
Yeah. And how do you found your peers? Are they supportive? Are they traditional high school, right out of high school students? Like, what is that environment like in the classroom?
Yeah, great question. They they're wonderful. There are a number of students who got here, being whether it's like mathematics Olympiad competitors or physics Olympiad competitors, but there's also an overwhelming amount of people who are, just people who are good at math and curious and enjoyed hobbies and stuff like that. I mean, what I've noticed with my peers as well is that there's this unifying strategy that everybody kind of adapts, and it's the approach to the academics with the understanding that STEM is a team sport fundamentally.
Mm.
Nobody does this alone. Well, at least nobody does this alone particularly well. And then maybe there's one person who's going to be a capital G great mathematician or something. And personally, I'm not one of them. So um, my yeah, my peers at least have all been people who have been eager to, have a homework group at 11 o'clock at night, and we're all just
Mm.
scribbling on whiteboards and taking breaks to, cut up a little bit. It's a lot like the military in that way.
Yeah. And then I know before we had talked, you're involved in some really cool research on campus. Can you talk with us a little bit about that opportunity, then also how you found it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the research that I'm doing right now, and I'm just starting, but it's I'm super excited about it. It is researching something called a thermosiphon, which is just a device that uses gravity to be able to create passive temperature transfer or heat transfer. And it's the idea of using thermosiphons in glaciers and bodies of ice to be able to slow the rate at which they're melting and drop their temperatures so that hopefully we could slow sea level rise and slow glacial sliding and melting and everything. So this is something that people have from what I understand have thought about since roughly the 1950s. And this is something that recently, in the last maybe 10 years, has like popped up in sci-fi novels. Throwing thermosiphons in glaciers to address climate change because 40% of the global population lives within a kilometer of every coastline. So sea level rise presents some of these larger disruptive threats to like global commerce and trade and stability.
Hmm.
Um, so this is also something that is in the way early stages. There are only kind of pieces of math that can be done right now to consider how much would it cost to be able to scale and deploy thermosiphons all the way out across the entirety of Antarctica. And there's
Hmm.
a lot of international law to consider there. There's all the ethics of geoengineering. But this is one tool in the tool belt that could be considered to try and get after the problem.
Yeah.
So,
And how did you find that opportunity?
So, I guess shameless plug here. So I 2 summers ago, in the summer of 23, I attended the Warrior Scholar Project at a STEM boot camp here at MIT. And while I was there, one of the faculty speakers who came to chat with us, is himself Marine Corps veteran, and he's a faculty member here at MIT. He is a glaciologist and leads a team that works on a lot of different problems in glaciology and planetary physics in general. But yeah, after he came in to speak with us and share some of his research, and also speaking explicitly about sea level rise and a lot of that stuff, had a conversation with him at the boot camp, had a couple more Zoom calls with him after that, and then yeah, just stayed engaged and eventually, honestly, asked him for a letter of recommendation, and he was gracious enough to write me one. So I'm certain that he did not have. Well, I'm certain that he had, an impact on the admissions decision here. But he also, kind of brought me in to start talking about, glaciology and seeing how I can start building up a lot of these skills and,
Yeah.
specifically research skills to, start getting after this problem, the academic side of things. So it's been
Yeah.
amazing.
Absolutely. Going back to that network, right?
Yeah.
But also, this is the type of in-depth understanding of interests and things that you're fascinated with outside of just wanting to be at MIT for the name of MIT itself, right? We work with a lot of students who are like, I just want to go to the best college possible. And it's like, yes, absolutely. Let's talk about that and what that looks like for you. But also, I mean, schools like MIT, schools like Princeton, they're getting a ton of applications from
Mm,
competitive applicants. And if you're just kind of like going after the trophy because you want to put it up on your shelf or the diploma because you just want to slap it up against your wall, right? Like that diploma itself is not going to lend access to some of these opportunities, right? Like that was a relationship that you had built. Those were interests of yours that now you are kind of like advocating for your own success. And just having a degree from MIT itself, sure, it's going to stand out, but you also have to, it's about what you do when you get where you're going and less about like where you went. So I love that you are just kind of a true product of like, it's less about the name of the school and more about what you do while you're there that really can make a difference in your academic experience, but also long-term career opportunities as well.
absolutely. No, I totally agree. Yeah.
How much longer do you have at MIT?
I'm a sophomore right now, so probably 2 to 3 years, depending upon what kinds of side quests might happen. But
Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about like the how are you funding this operation, right? Like at the end of the day, there's always a price tag. And what does that look like for you? Are you using the GI Bill? Did you apply for financial aid? What's that process like?
so there's something to. So I'm on Chapter 33, vocational rehab benefits, or veteran readiness and employment benefits. Um, So that's been fantastic. There's also something to highlight here that I think is really important. So MIT is among, I think there are something like 100 or maybe just over 100 schools in the United States that have needs blind admissions. So
Hmm.
they do not take your or your family's income into account in admissions decisions. And then they also, if you can get in, and so long as, at least for veterans, you are making less than like $250,000 a year or something, take that with a pinch of salt because I haven't looked at these numbers in a while. But that they operate with the idea that if you get in, they don't want money to have to be the barrier to entry. And I know that this is also the case for a number of other competitive universities across the country. So I also know some veterans who are using the post 9/11 GI Bill. I also know some who are just using the MIT full ride and keeping their benefits for, say, a family member or dependent or something like
Hmm.
that. But yeah, there are definitely multiple pathways to financing this.
Yeah. And did you use VR&E at UCCS? So you kind of already knew you were going to use that at MIT, or what was that like?
I actually didn't know much about VR&E when I was at UCCS, so I was using up my GI Bill. Um, and then, especially as I was transitioning over, and actually really through the Warrior Scholar Project, I made a friend who, let me know, like, hey, this is another program that has all kinds of benefits too. So
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing more and more, I think, applicants use voc rehab over the GI Bill
Mhm.
as kind of word of mouth comes about, how to just kind of extend those educational benefits. So that's definitely a resource that more applicants are becoming aware of and starting to utilize. So it'll be interesting to see kind of long term because that program did just get revamped, as you mentioned. So yeah, it's awesome that you were able to kind of get plugged into that ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Other than that, what's been the best part about being at MIT?
I think that's a good question. There's a lot of good and a lot of excitement. Um, this is going to sound like a drawback, but I promise it's a positive. It's kind of the chaos. It's a very organizationally flat kind of. There are a million things happening all at the same time, and there's so many interesting projects to get involved in. So I think it's that, and just the general creativity that people exhibit in their daily lives. Whether it's the ways in which they're trying to approach a homework problem, or the way that they're trying to approach like a hobby project, like making a really cool kite or something like that. So yeah, there's so many opportunities here specifically for climate as well. I mean that is again that's been my driver, and coincidentally the whole institute is pivoting towards climate in a way that they haven't really messaged since like World War II and moving towards national defense. So I think personally there's also this massive like existential gratification that I enjoy, getting to see all these people talk about this problem and consider like not just talk about, hey, climate change is scary, because anybody can get lost down that rabbit hole, but seeing people who are like at the top of their game in their careers talk about, all right, this is an issue, how do we deal with this, like let's roll up our sleeves and not wring our hands, can do those at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, what a kind of energizing, environment to be around. But what do you do for fun?
I mean right
And maybe
now.
the research and the learning piece is like and that is absolutely incredible. But I know you had also just mentioned about going out and learning different types of dance. So I know that you have like a social community and environment there too. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I love music. Dance is a ton of fun, and Boston and Cambridge are definitely they are deep in the bench when it comes to live music and dance communities. I played some guitar. Last semester as well, I took a music composition class and I started learning some piano, and those things have been hugely gratifying. So um, there is, I think, a common phenomenon where people will often forget to like build fun into the schedule, and they just get stuck,
Mhm.
working on homeworks. And, eventually then maybe Thanksgiving break comes up and you dip back into your hobby. But I definitely think that it's a fundamental pillar of well-being to, like keep on working on the things that are just whimsical.
Yeah. Things that bring you joy. And
Yeah.
like I said, if that is the research, absolutely 100%. I joke here that like reading about college admissions brings me so much joy, which is like the admissions nerd of me. But I just love, the work that I get to do. So 100%, if academics and the research and learning is like your love, then yeah, I think being in an environment where that's encouraged and celebrated and championed is just, I mean, that's finding, truly the best fit college for you. As we begin to wrap up, Justin, what advice do you have for our listeners, either around pursuing passions, going for, those selective admissions, institutions, or even just like where to start? What's your advice here?
Mm. No, I think don't be afraid to iterate. It's great to have a clear vision for the future. It's really important to have a clear idea of what you want, and I think starting with those base principles is really important. But don't be afraid to reach for doing something that can be not just employable after the military. I know that security is really important, but something that you really feel connected to. Be willing to take that shot. Hopefully it turns out. So also heavily lean on the veteran community. So I'm also a member of the Student Veterans of America here at MIT, and like leaning on those folks just for like the institutional wisdom of how to be a student, and questions about where to go get the best pizza or something like that. Vets always show up for each other, and I definitely think that continuing to lean into that is important. Um, because also in being the recipient of that kindness, it's important that we then pass that on to the next new guy. So
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Well, this has been great. I always love when I get to chat with our students and learn a little bit more about what you all are up to on our partner campuses, especially, but also kind of a chance for you all to reflect and kind of impart your wisdom on those who are kind of trying to do exactly, the admission cycle and process that you completed not too long ago. So thank you so much for being here and letting me pick your brain and sharing your story. And I know we'll probably see you in like a National Geographic magazine or doing something super cool, helping, save the world through climate change. So appreciate the work that you're doing too.
I appreciate it, Sydney. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been great chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. Chat soon.
For sure.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more service to school stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.